You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Joe Biden was arguably the most powerful man in the world. But one thing he couldn't control was time. Ever since the U.S. president's much criticized debate last month against his Republican rival Donald Trump, he faced a growing chorus of calls to quit due to his age. Over and over again, he refused. But then, on a summer Sunday afternoon, he relented.
After weeks of pressure, Joe Biden is dropping out of the U.S. presidential race, the first sitting president in more than half a century to do so.
This is an unprecedented moment in American history. Never before has an incumbent quit so close to a presidential election. Never before had there been so much concern about a commander-in-chief's current and future physical and mental fitness. Mr. Biden worked hard to make the case for staying on.
I don't walk as easy as I used to. I don't speak as smoothly as I used to. I don't debate as well as I used to. But I know what I do know. I know how to tell the truth.
But the truth is, the Democrats really want to beat Donald Trump and the Republicans. They believed Mr. Biden couldn't beat the cruel reality of aging. So he bowed out, saying it was in the best interest of his party and his country. Hi, I'm Teresa Tang. My preparations for this episode of CNA Correspondent have changed so many times. 3 or 4 times, I think, as we tracked a dizzying deluge of developments out of the U.S. With me to make sense of it all is Nick Harper. He's in Delaware, where Mr. Biden made his bombshell announcement as he battles a COVID infection. Hey, Nick.
Hey, Teresa.
The president's decision to leave the race, endorse his VP Kamala Harris, isn't entirely surprising, right? But it is still another eyebrow-raising moment in this campaign. What do you make of how Mr. Biden told the world that he's quitting? He issued a statement on social media on a Sunday, and to me, that speaks to the urgency of this announcement.
I mean, it was unbelievable. That statement coming out of the blue in the middle of a Sunday afternoon, just dropped onto social media with no fanfare, with no big speech, with no big announcement. We're also being told that really it blindsided even his closest staff that he was with at his residence here in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. He only told them apparently 1 minute before he unleashed that statement onto the world, which I think was a surprise to them. But you're right, I think it also speaks to the urgency of the matter. The fact that he has taken about 3.5 weeks since that disastrous debate that started all of this, considering his next move. He was holed up here at his private residence, considering what to do. And we're told that he made the decision on Saturday afternoon. He spoke to 2 close advisors. They worked for 24 hours to come up with that statement. And then they dropped that bombshell on Sunday afternoon.
I want to take a second to tell listeners just where you are, Nick. You're in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. All weekend, you've been there on what we have dubbed Biden Watch. So the president has a holiday home there, and many believe that this was going to be a critical weekend.
Yeah, very much so. That was the thinking, that it would be the weekend where we could potentially see him dropping out. So I jumped in a car from Washington, D.C. on Saturday morning. It would normally take about 3 hours, but there's plenty of holiday traffic. Bear in mind that this is a very popular holiday destination. It's on the East Coast. There are plenty of people hitting the beach, enjoying themselves this weekend. But Joe Biden, he has that residence that is surrounded by Secret Service, by state police, very much keeping everyone, even myself, at bay from President Biden. But we came here with the hope that we might see some movement in this story.
How close are you to Biden's home?
About 0.5 kilometre away, so not within the security perimeter, but, very, very close to where the president stays. And yeah, we were waiting for that decision, waiting to see what would unfold.
So Mr. Biden, he's thrown his support behind Kamala Harris, as I mentioned, and she has already vowed to earn and win this nomination. But there have been opposing views on Ms. Harris as a replacement. On the one hand, she has the name recognition and she can access those campaign funds that have been raised under the Biden-Harris banner. But then on the flip side, polling results, they haven't been great. And in her early years in office, she was criticized as being out of her depth.
Yeah, very much so. And I think that is something that she will now need to battle over the next 3.5 months. She was given the undesirable task of looking at immigration. And of course, the Republicans are very much making this presidency, this election, a referendum on the issue of immigration. They've made it their number one concern. It's what many voters out there want to see sorted out. The fact that there's been so many illegal immigrants coming across the border, and now they're going to say that Kamala Harris didn't get that under control. I mean, it's interesting on the polling because it's wildly different depending on which poll you look at. One poll, though, very recently did suggest that she had a slight edge on Biden. Both of them would lose to Donald Trump, but she had a slightly better chance than Joe Biden. I mean, we don't know whether that's going to play out. We won't find out until November the 5th, but she's going to have to work hard, I guess, to get out from under those negative images, especially with the Republicans now attacking her so hard.
Yeah, I wonder how this is going to play out among the voters, because I have a friend who's American, and she said, I don't want to vote for Biden, but I also don't want to vote for Trump. So now with Kamala Harris in the mix, it's going to be interesting which way these undecided or fence sitters will sway. Okay, so, even before Mr. Biden officially dropped out, the New York Times reported that the Republican campaign team was already preparing for this eventuality, preparing for a Trump-Harris matchup. And after the news was official, Trump issued a statement. He said Biden is the worst president in the history of the United States. Then his running mate, J.D. Vance, very quickly said, bring it on, and he went on the attack. So the Trump campaign has already gathered its dossier against Ms. Harris. Nick, what are her chances realistically against Trump?
Just quickly on that statement from Donald Trump, there was no empathy or sympathy. He literally began that statement saying crooked Joe Biden. I think Kamala Harris is going to struggle because, yes, the Republicans have been working on a plan B. If we got to this eventuality, they already had the attack ads ready to run in multiple swing states. And within about an hour or two of the news, there were reports that those ads attacking Kamala Harris were already out on the airwaves. There is very much that negative perception that she's going to have to fight. Because also the Republicans are saying, look at the Democratic Party. It's in chaos. They're unable to work out who is at the top of the ticket, and therefore they shouldn't be allowed the chance to run the country after November's election.
Yeah, you talk about those ads already being out, and that's because time is running out. The Democratic National Convention, it starts on August the 19th in Chicago. That's less than a month away. Can you take us through what's going to happen now and how free are delegates really when it comes to voting? I read an article and it said delegates are free to vote their choice, except for when they can't.
Well, exactly. And even Joe Biden, a couple of weeks ago, before he dropped out, told the delegates that they were free to do what they wanted, even though they had already pledged their support to him. I think what we might see happen is all of this being solved ahead of the convention. We know that there was already this plan in place to have what's called a virtual roll call, which means that they would have got all the delegates on the phone and got them to fully support the nominee, Joe Biden, ahead of the convention taking place. Normally that would take place at the convention. It didn't during the COVID-19 pandemic. 4 years ago, they did it virtually. That made sense then. It doesn't make sense now. And there's been a lot of anger amongst Democrats who are saying, look, why are you doing it early? It's now about whether or not they decide to go ahead with that plan, which would likely happen in the first week of August, and try and force through Kamala Harris as the nominee, rather than taking it to the convention where she could see challenges and it might not get decided until convention week who is going to be the nominee.
Another key question is also who Ms. Harris's choice for running mate will be. Do you have any sense of that at this point?
Yeah, there's a few names that have already been mentioned. I mean, the general thinking is that she's going to try and find someone who is not Joe Biden. So she won't find an 81-year-old politician. She's going to look for someone who has youth on their side, who has vigor, vitality on his side, someone, all of those qualities that essentially Joe Biden didn't have. She, of course, is an African-American with South Asian heritage. She's already made history by being the first vice president in history to have those qualities. The thinking is, therefore, she might choose a white male. And there are a few options out there. The Transport Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, he's young, he's dynamic, he might get chosen. Or we might see someone like Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, or Roy Cooper, the North Carolina governor. All of those are very much established political figures who have support behind them. So she might choose them as a result of those qualities that they bring to the ticket.
what is the view on whether the president should have maybe made his decision sooner? I mean, the optics aren't great, right? It seemed like day after day, another high-profile supporter turned on him and that he was basically forced into a corner with no other option. Do you think it should have been done sooner?
I mean, perhaps. As you mentioned earlier, calling it Biden watch, I think kind of says a lot, because we have, for this last 3.5 weeks, been waiting and watching to see what Joe Biden was going to do. The traditional thinking would say that we have seen chaos unfold over the last 3.5 weeks because Democrats have come forward telling the president to step aside. Chaos that now the Republicans are helping to try and motivate their base to win over undecided voters, to really try and capitalize on. So yes, in an ideal world, and perhaps we won't have this hindsight until after the result of the November election, if it goes to the Republicans, the thinking is maybe Joe Biden should have dropped out sooner. He obviously did not. He dug in his heels. He seemed determined. It seemed as if he would go the course, but that bombshell statement obviously changing all of that.
Yeah, and watching these past few weeks unfold, the feeling that I got was things really changed after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. You know, those images from that day, they were so visceral. Former President Trump projected such images of strength. And then you juxtapose that with Mr. Biden going into isolation because of COVID-19 at a pretty pivotal moment in the re-election campaign. And I read one analyst take, and they said an assassin's bullet couldn't get Trump, but a virus got Biden. What do you think was the turning point, Nick?
I mean, it is a harsh take, but in many ways that is very truthful. We have seen a real switch in support over the last few weeks. The momentum has very much been behind the Republicans. After the debate, there was momentum, but that assassination attempt, I think, really created for Donald Trump a moment that he capitalized on by getting unity in the party. It went straight into then the Republican convention in Milwaukee for 4 days. He appeared 2 days after that assassination attempt, and we saw even his rivals, people who'd run against him for the nomination, falling in behind him, giving full-throated speeches of support for the former president. He had momentum, he had support, he had unity. I mean, we don't have assassination attempts very often. The last one was back in 1981. I think it will be remembered for what it was, but also for the fact that it could have been and probably will be seen as a pivotal moment in this election campaign.
Yeah, and at the Republican National Convention, I was in the newsroom watching it here from Singapore. I couldn't look away. I don't know if it was the MTV-esque vibes, the music, the lights. It was definitely electric. Okay, so Mr. Biden, we know he's 81 years old, but I want to try and forget the politics for a second. If you drop all that, this is a man who many say is incredibly decent and good. And I've heard people criticize the media for being so mean, for targeting this nice old man. How would you respond to that, Nick? As a journalist, what's the value of focusing so much on his age?
I think if you consider a journalist's job as being to speak truth to power, the truth is that he is 81 years old. The truth is that he is an old man. And with that comes the possibility that he might fall sick at any moment, at a time when he is running the United States. And I think, therefore, it also comes with questions about his ability, his mental ability, his physical fitness, not just to serve out this term, but what it means for a second term, going all the way until he's 86 if he were to be re-elected, which won't now happen. So I think, I mean, journalists obviously have been pointing that out, but it's also something that has worried Democratic voters out there. And poll after poll suggests that age has been something that they have also noticed and picked up on and worried about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's keep talking about age. In America, there is a lower age limit for the presidency. You have to be at least 35 years old. But there's no upper age limit. Could we see one coming? Or at least maybe serious talk of one, given all we've seen in this campaign and the fact that candidates seem to be getting older?
Yeah, you're right. There's only 3 things that you need to be able to run for president. Being a natural-born citizen, so you're American, you're at least 35, and you have to have lived in the US, I believe it's for 14 years. Beyond that, there's nothing else. The upper limit, I mean, it's very interesting because I think it also plays into Supreme Court justices who serve out those roles for life. And there is that thing of, well, there is no upper limit for them. Should there be for other political offices, the president being the highest? I think it is going to be a live debate going forward, but I think it would be a monumental shift for there to be a change of the law, a change probably of the Constitution to be able to rewrite things and say, well, look, beyond a certain point, you need to retire or not even consider running at all.
Mm-hmm. Before we go, the editorial board of the New York Times ran an op-ed piece. They described Mr. Biden's decision as courageous, that he's placed the national interest above his own pride and ambition. It takes a lot to walk away in this way, right? So how do you think Mr. Biden will be remembered? Will this withdrawal be the defining moment of his legacy?
Well, I think there was a chance that if he decided to run for re-election and if he lost, and particularly if he lost by a landslide, that would have been his legacy, that he was the stubborn old man who refused to listen to his party, who went ahead with his re-election and then lost disastrously. This all flips it on his head, and I think there is now an opportunity to reflect on what he's achieved. In that statement, he laid out some of the things that he feels proudest about having achieved during the last 3.5 years. He talks about healthcare costs. He talks about putting in new gun legislation, a huge infrastructure bill. There is plenty that he has done during his presidency. I guess it is now a question of whether he's remembered for that or, like Lyndon B. Johnson, LBJ, the fact that he withdrew from a re-election campaign back in 1968 and we're still talking about it, is that going to be the defining thing for Joe Biden?
Lots of questions. Nick, you have been on TV for hours and hours delivering live reports. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me.
Thank you very much for having me.
A reminder that the TV episodes of CNA Correspondent air every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. And you can find the latest on the developments around the U.S. presidential election on our website, cna.asia, as well as YouTube. The team behind this week's episode is Saya Win, Clara Ong, Crispina Robert, Craig Dale, and myself, Teresa Tang. Thanks very much for joining us.